to pick up from where we left off. The Chasam Sofer came along with an incredible chiddush. I know it's been a short while, but so let me remind you. His chiddush was that there were two stages to the Gzeira. Stage one was Cholov. And Cholov, according to the Chazon Ish, was a very strong Gzeira, a Dover Shebeminyan, which means that even if there is no longer any real chashash for Dover Tomei, because people don't milk camels, because there are no camels in the country, doesn't matter, it's a Dover Shebeminyan, game over. At a later stage, Chazal came along and made a new Gzeira called Gvina. Says the Chasam Sofer, if the milk is osur, how does it all of a sudden magically become mutter when it turns into cheese? The Teretz says the Gzeira was on Cholov, when it is in the state of being Cholov. There was no Gzeira until that point of anything else. The Gzeira was Cholov.
So until that point, cheese was more maker than Cholov.
Cheese was totally mutter. Now, how did that work? Because, newsflash, you make cheese out of milk. So you've got something which is osur. How does it magically become mutter? The Teretz says that the Dover Shebeminyan was only when it was in that state of being Cholov. And with that he explains, he says this is Pshat in Rashi, and with that he explains Pshat in the Gemara that says that the problem with Gvina, because we know Dover Tomei is not Mamid, what's the problem with Gvina? Cholov beinei atfi, because you still have a bit of milk left there. And milk is osur, because there's always a bit of milk left. And milk is osur, is osur, is osur. You're saying it's not going to be Mamid, and it doesn't matter, it's Dover Shebeminyan. That is where we kind of left it off, right? We didn't actually totally finish the Chasam Sofer, because if you remember, the shaila that he was asked was that there were charedim lidvar Hashem, there were yureim ushleimim, who wouldn't dream of buying cholov stam, but they quite happily bought bread that was made with cholov, and could you join for a zimun, etc. Remember that was the shaila? So, now, the Pri Chodosh, let's open the door, let's get some air. The Pri Chodosh, I know it's clear you're not allowed to have any air, but let's try. The Pri Chodosh was, remember, he was made that in Amsterdam they actually drank the milk, yeah? Mm-hmm. So, says the Chasam Sofer, what's he going to say about the Pri Chodosh, right? The Pri Chodosh is a chosh of a posik. Over the page, yeah, second page of the Chasam Sofer. I'll show you where. I'll just read this. V'kosav pri chodosh she'al zeh somach b'hiyoso b'Amsterdam. When he was in Amsterdam, he was somach. It's about 10, 12 lines down. How can that be? So he says that's because they were Sfaradim, and he called them Portuguesim. Right? Mm-hmm. He says because if you'd find the line which starts. Yeah, that's right. So find the line which starts either B'hiyosai b'Amsterdam. Here it is. If you can look at my, got it? B'hiyosai, the Pri Chodosh B'hiyosai b'Amsterdam. Ochali mohem cholov shecholvoi nochri. I'm not sure whether that's Rachmana litzlan or Ratzaloima. I'll leave you to decide. Ki b'medina soy mokom sheyotza misham.
Shama
shchichi cholav gemalim. Because where he came from, there was a place where they had cholav gemalim. Mashein came b'medina seinu hine mashekosav b'Amsterdam. Tzivonu? I'm not sure how that word comes in. Shenis achsen etzel Sfardim Portuguesim sham. You're the Portuguese there. Veheim noyagim heter al pi radvaz hanal. They go along with the Radvaz. The Radvaz is of the opinion that if there is no chash, it's not a Dover Shebeminyan. The Radvaz holds it's not a Dover Shebeminyan. Milk was never a Dover Shebeminyan. So if there is no real chashash for Dover Tomei, and in Amsterdam, at that point in time, the milk of Gemalim was either non-existent or very expensive, and therefore there's no real chashash, So they were noyeg that it's okay. No problem. Okay.
אז הפרי חדש היה אוכל חלב...
הוא כתב, הוא כתב.
חלב נוכרי?
ברור. הוא כותב את זה בעצמו, ברור. הנה, בגוף הדין, כבר כוסבתי לאל, he says, I've already spoken about it. But whichever way you like, but Lamaisa the Radvaz is Bakel. Keep going, go down. V'onu noyag in Cain, afilu halacha kinach poskim. Says, go down 3 lines. He says, even if, let's say, the halacha is like those other poskim, mikol mokim, and this is the bit to underline. Kiven diyesh das lahachmir, kva kiblu avoiseinu aleihem ka'oisom deo, v'osur aleinu b'nei Ashkenaz midino. I am prepared to concede, says the Chasam Sofer, that there is a legitimate halachic opinion, the Radvaz or whoever it will be, which the Bri Chodesh went along with, Hakol tov v'yafeh. That's good for Portuguesim. That's good for... But for us, B'nai Ashkenaz, we were mekabel that the halacha is not like that. And therefore it is osur on us midina ve'ein lanu haTorah. There is no heta. And now here he says something quite amazing, which really goes off into a subtopic, which we won't delve into, but we're going to mention it. V'ayin mogan Avram Siman Kuf Nun Aleph v'korov be'einai neder de'oiraisa. Afal pisha mikol mokim kill kakoli surim derabonon. Now, on the one hand, this is a really important thing for you to realize. On the one hand, cholav stam is derabonon. It's not deraisa, but it is deraisa. But it's deraisa for a different reason, because it has the din of a neder, because for Ashkenazim certainly, they were mekabel, it becomes a strong minhag and a takana that were mekabel, and that has the din, says the Mogen Avram, has a din of a neder, which is da'iraisa. And therefore there's no room to be mekel. Hainu dekach kiblu ha-neder. V'korv be'enai der da'iraisa. Afal pishim mikol mokim kil kechol yisurim drabonon. Hainu kach kiblu ha-neder shiye osur aleinu kekula isa drabonon. So, no, because you can't make a neder. You can't make a heta. There's no heta. There's no heta. That's only when a personal neder. Only on a personal neder. There's no. Nice try. No, אי אפשר. זה מה שהוא אומר, לא צודק.
אישה שנודרת בעלה.
לא שומע. This is when a kahal, a kiblu alayhu. There's no hafara. Of course, there's no hafara. And by the way, it's not such a stretch of the imagination. I don't want to be controversial, but I gave a shir on Shabbos for the women about my psak that I gave at the Val Commission that women in Al Kahila cannot be elected to the Vorstand. They can be elected to the Rat, but not to the Vorstand. And I gave a shir to the women about it. Now that some of the heat had died down, I felt they deserved. And I gave the whole. Unfortunately, it was Shabbos, so it couldn't be recorded. And I approached it from a bunch of different angles. One of which was halachic. I went back to the elections in the Yishuv in 1918, where the Shaila went to the Chasam, so it went to the Chafetz Chaim and Rabbi Chaim Meiser and Rabbi Shuleb Diskin and Rav Kook, who also forbade it, absolutely, by the way. And Rav Hoffman and the Sridei Eish has 2 tshuvas on it. It's a really, really interesting topic. But part of what I said, and this is important for us also to hear, there is a concept, and this is something which Rav Soloveitchik also dead against it. It's people.
Young Israel has it in their policy.
Not the OU. The OU allowed it in 2015 or 2017, I think it was. They empaneled. They had, but the Young Israel, it is still forbidden in Young Israel. Yeah. The question, and here's the point. I just want to make one very quick point, which is important to remember, and it's sort of apropos of this. I was once asked when I was. At one stage, it was only sort of half serious. Somebody asked me whether, at some Siddur Kiddushin that I was doing, whether if I would have any objection, if a woman read the Ksubah, and the person was knowledgeable and said there's absolutely no halachic reason why a woman shouldn't read a Ksubah. I said, you're absolutely right. A monkey can read the Ksubah. In fact, we don't need to read the Ksubah at all. We can do a dance. You can play some guitar. You can do whatever you like. And yet, if you want that a woman would read the Ksubah, I'm not going to be involved in that Siddur Kiddushin. But There's no halachic objection. True. But there is such a thing as a Masorah in Klal Yisrael. There absolutely, a woman can be. Why can't a woman be a sandik to bris milah? Also no reason. Yeah, a woman can shecht. Hakoil shecht in the opening words of Maseches Chulin, and yet there are more paskins because Klal Yisrael decided that women shouldn't shecht. They can't, they don't, and can't. Even though the Mishnah says mafurish, these are the opening words of the Mishnah in Chulin. Hakoil shechatin. Of course, and this is. I don't want to go too much into the halacha, but there is such a concept, and part of this has some halachic expression as well. It overlaps. Now, again, I'm not entering into the whole topic because it is very nuanced, and there are different opinions on some of these things. No question about it. And that's what I said to them actually on Shabbos was, that's why you need a Rav. That's one of the reasons you need a Rav. Because after having been here, now for 5 years, I think I understand and I have enough Masorah to be able to paskin what I think is right. What I think is the Ratzon Hashem for this Kehillah, in this location, at this moment in time. 2 kilometers down the road, a whole different Kehillah might be totally different. It could be a different psak would be appropriate for them. And I don't know if I've ever told you, not long after I came here, I had the zechus to, I had about 15 minutes with Moshe Steinbuch, Gesund, and I explained to him very carefully the setup of the Kehillah here. I asked him a halachic shaila, and I asked him a shaila in Hanhoga. And the halachic shaila was, what is this Kehillah? I know it says Adas Yisrael, Kehillah Adas Yisrael on the tin, but let's not go into the politics of the other place and all this other sort of stuff. But there was a Kehillah here in this very building. There was, but unfortunately, as we know, it was uprooted, decimated, nitka, and B'neis and B'chemlas Hashem Aleinu. There are mainly Russian and Ukrainian Balei Tshuva and Gerim who have set up a Kehillah 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was. And therefore, where does that bind us in terms of minhag? That's shaila number 1. And then, mitoich that, where...
What did he say on that?
Sorry?
What did he say?
I'm going to tell you, no? I'm not going to leave you hanging. Don't worry, Abby. I need the answer now, I need it now. What?
Bestial here.
Bestial, genau. Dann fragt man nicht. Es ist schon gepaskend. Ja, natürlich, wie immer. It was never Bestial. I guarantee you that. Of course not.
Oh.
This is closer to Poland than anything else. Do you know how many Gera Stieblach there were in Berlin in 1930?
Oh, yeah,
how many Alexander Stieblach? Hakshemagt was a Kleis. It was a. You're getting confused between different sides of the Elbe. Never mind. Let's, which is where the minhag, but having said that, 1 second. I'm joshing with you. You okay? Yeah. Okay. So Rav Steinbuch, he sat up and he really listened and he was quiet for a minute or two. He asked me a few questions to understand the mitzvahs and the reality, and he asked me who I was, sort of, and where I'd learnt and who I knew and etc. And then he looked at me and he said, if you are their first full-time Rav and Marad Asra, he says, you will decide. But not yet. Wait until you feel that you will be Kaveh and Hogim. In other words, so the answer to the halachic question is, sadly, the original Kehillah as it was Nertak, and it's gone. It does not exist anymore. This is a new, in other words, he was passing that halachically, this is a new enterprise. We may have borrowed some of the names, but it's a new thing, it's a new hefza. That was number 1. And then number 2, he said, so therefore you will decide. If they've appointed you as their first full-time, with all covered to Rav Robig, who was here on a temporary basis, you're the first full-time Rav who's living here full-time. He says, you will decide. He said, but wait till you've really got it. Lahavdil elef havdalas. There's in the Harvard Business Review, one of the books that I bought as I was coming in, there's a book called The First 90 Days, which is for leaders.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, and one of the things you don't do is just do something for the sake of stamping your identity on the place. Don't make change just for the sake of it. Or as a comic once said, in the inversion of the popular saying, don't just do something, sit there. You get it? Mm-hmm. It's the other way around. There's a temptation just to do something. Do something. And I feel, actually only within the last year or so, I feel much, much more confident now that I get it. And on the basis of that, therefore, when I was asked that question by WhatsApp by the Val Commission, 45 minutes later, I sent them a full and written answer, and I said I would follow it up with a shir if anybody wanted, and I stand by that. I'll call upon him. That I felt, and still feel, it was right. So the point being that Klal Yisrael, and this is back to the Bnei Ashkenaz, they had two legitimate halachic approaches to this topic, open to them. The Chasam Sofer says, Kiblu alayhu, that the Bnei Ashkenaz were makabel, not like the Radvaz, not like the Pri Chodesh. According to the Chasam Sofer, they accepted it to be a davar shebeminyan, which, by the way, is open to discussion, as we'll see, the Chazon Ish, maybe still today, who argues on that. But then he introduces this really... The Radvaz, clearly. Radvaz holds it's not that when there's no chashash of davar tamid, there's no issa. We're talking about those who say that even though there's no chashash, that it remains. Okay. If that is so, then the fact that they were makabelit as a kahal, as whatever that means, a sector of Klal Yisrael, that has more toikef than the Isser itself, because the Isser itself can't be more than a drabonon. But it is entirely possible that being over it, and in other words, you can have a case where when you have a Sofer in it, you can be mekel. It's got the dinim of Sofer drabonon. But to go against Pirates get there, you could be over an Isser Deiraisa. Let that sink in, based on the Magen Avraham. That's a very important, just a concept for your general knowledge. I wanted to. So
there's no machlokas that it's like a neder.
That's what the Chasam Sofer says. I have a laver al zeh over al neder deiraisa. That's the Chasam Sofer's opinion, based on the fact that he said it was a davar shebeminyan. And that Ashkenazim, excuse me, he said accepted it wholesale. That's what he says. It doesn't mean everybody has to agree with him, but but his point is valid nonetheless, insofar as, were he to be right that the kahal, that Klal Yisrael, that Chelik of Klal Yisrael accepted it, then you could have a concept of it being an Issa Deiraisa. Yeah. Sorry. It would be a Deiraisa. Yeah, that's correct.
But we have in Israel minhag for having chalav akum.
We're not up to there yet.
No, you said the Ashkenazim got on, but the Ashkenaz got on. But where we saw other kihilot that they accept beside the Pri Chadash and the Radbaz. We see more Rishonim that
Rishonim there are. The question is, we're now coming down into the Achronim, into the Halacha L'Maisa. We're down to the the Chacham Tzvi, the Pri Chodesh, and the Chasam Sofer, and so we're going to take it down L'Maisa. Okay, but of course there are other Rishonim. Me'ato. So go to the penultimate paragraph. Me'ato. Cholov shechol v'nochri v'ein Yisrael re'ehu asura aleinu. Imi deiraisa, imi drabonon. Either deiraisa or drabonon. Deiraisa mitzad the neder, drabonon mitzad the davar shebeminyan. Kimavur. Upoiretz geder yishchenu nachash. Famous pasuk, right? But now he comes to the shaila, and by the way, it's worth looking at this because this is also negeya to an approach in Rabbanus and in Psak. Very important. Let's have a look. And of course, I've forgotten my reading glasses again. Masha Chasam Maloscha, Shafilu Hanizhorim, Mikol Mokoim, Nasalhem Keheta, Ukechayma Perutza Liknois Mipalta Pass, Shaniloshim Cholov, Shelohem, Tzarech Ayin Godel Me'ayin Nispashal Heterahu. So this was his problem. Yidden who would not dream of buying the Cholov, which wasn't observed, a Jew didn't observe it, but they quite happily in his place bought the bread, which was, the lisha was done with milk, with that milk. What doesn't make any sense. This was the question. So he says, V'yanti b'zelil mod zchus, ulai svira lehu, maybe they've got some sort of limud zchus. Okay, I'm not really so interested in what the actual limud zchus is. Go right down, go down, va'atobni, and this is important. So he says, look, they're wrong. Any Yidden who do that it's crazy, it's wrong. He tries to be melamed zechus with some lamdas, but he's just doing a little zechus. Now this is important. Va'atobni, shmoir nafshecha v'lo titash Torah simecha. You yourself need to know. In other words, you should of course not be buying this bread. Umikol mokem letzaref bezimun. But this was his shaila. Tziruf for zimun. People are eating it. Kiven de prichodosh heyed disfardim oichlim lehedya. Inhu meichel ochli ledidon mistam kemi nami loisosim. So because they eat it, we should not close that door off insofar as tziruf for zimun. In other words, this very same bread, were there to be, let's say, Sfardim at the table, and they would be buying it or eating it, there'd be no problem. So you can't say it's chaza treif. Yes, an Ashkenazi should not be eating it. That's true. But you can't treat it the same as something that is absolutely treif, and therefore it would be illogical to say, this is what he's saying, it'd be logical to say that were the Sfardim to been eating it, of course you could do zimun. You could share with zimun with them. So we're not going to close that door. V'oid ikamishum eva. V'oid, furthermore, he says, enmity. You're creating machlokas. V'godoil hashalom. V'shalom lecha u'letoirascha. And therefore he says, even though, if an Ashkenazi buys and eats that bread, the Chasam Sofer will hold he has probably been over an Issa Neder D'Oraisa. Poretz Geder Yishchenu Nachosh. But if he eats it and you're at the table with him and he wants to do zimun with him. Godel Hashalom. And there is another masterclass in balance in Psak. Okay? I wanted to take that out.
It's a little bit different than Moshe Feinstein. Tshuva to Rav Shtar, but it's similar in that.
Yes, again, you're seeing a in real world rabbinics. This is very important to know. Now you need to know. Sometimes you have to take a stand. Is somebody being a davkanik? Are they trying to, or is it just ignorance? Is it, and these are the sort of situations, especially in not such from kehillas, where you need to know and think and take advice where appropriate, where the line is. Not poshut.
Well, it's even stronger actually than Rav Moshe Feinstein, because here he says clearly there isn't an Isra D'Oraisa involved for Ashkenazim, but he doesn't say for Darchi Sholah you shouldn't protest it.
To the zimun, because Fardim, because you'd have the same scenario, so therefore we can't say it's chazan treif.
This is Fardim at the same time, not only those persons that they're doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
tricky.
It is. Wie sagt man das?
Zwickmühle.
Was bedeutet das?
It's a game with these things, and then whatever. When you're in the corner and you can't move, it's called
Zwick. Was ist Zwick?
It's literally Zwick is like to pinch, and Mühle is like
grind. Is the name of the game, whatever.
Okay, it's the name of the game. Okay, that's right.
But anyhow, today for Kuli Alma is not allowed to make bread with milk, unless if it's small.
No, you're talking about Bossa B'cholov. You're mixing in something else.
No, in general.
That's what I'm saying. You're mixing in something else because people won't know that it's chalavi and they'll have a basari with it. I have a story about that. So either it has to be a different shape. I have a story in Zurich about that. I have a Zurich story. When I, very, very young married, I came to Zurich for a wedding, and I was talking to the then Rav Dani Levi, who I knew through the family, whatever, and the Reb Chaim Moshe's father. So anyway, my wife and I we came for a friend's wedding. We're talking about 1988, I think. And then we drove to Venice. We did a short road trip. And we went and bought buns for the trip. And we had, I don't know if I should say this on camera because I'm not sure. Put it this way. We bought buns and we had cold cut sandwiches. And we came back and I had some leftover sandwiches. I can't remember what happened. And whether either the place I was staying or whatever, it became clear that these were milky buns. Now it was cold, everything was cold, but I had meaty sandwiches with these milky thing. And I went to Reb Daniel Levi Zechron of Racha and told him. And the reason I did it, of course, was we said, but there should be a sign saying, because that's, as you've learnt in Basar B'Cholov, one of two things. Either you make them a different shape, or you put on a simon, and maybe they even did both. But I was not from there, and I didn't. I'm not blaming anybody or anything, but it just shows you how it did. I had those sandwiches, and I had no clue either. Well, as a tourist, you don't know. This is actually an interesting point. I don't know what the normal shape is. I'd never been to Zurich before. I don't know what the normal shape. I don't know what shape they do in Zurich. For all I know, they have Hamantaschen all year. Well, what do I know? You know what I mean? So I didn't know, and either I didn't see the sign or it had fallen down or something. I'm just telling you what happened. How do we get onto that?
Nowadays we have a sign for bread.
If it's milky, if you make milky bread, that's the halacha.
If
you make
for burek, we have a dreieck.
Okay, say that.
It's all must be cheese.
כמו שכתוב בהלכה.
Croissant, that's why croissant was invented.
But it's not a bread.
So you asked the rabbi.
Croissant is not
Yes.
a bread.
No, I
I'm talking
had
about
to
bread,
tell him.
bread.
But, anyway,
There's no any shape
how do
for
we get
bread.
onto that? I don't remember.
What did he say?
What did he say? He did find it rather amusing. That the idea that we would have. No, I don't mean it in that sense. I don't know.
The halacha today that we don't have any. I know that I mix basar with challah, but nowadays we don't have any.
Who's
any
we?
permission.
Who's we?
מנהג ישראל,
שמה?
שאין לחם חלבי.
לא נכון,
איפה
בצוריך
יש לחם
יש.
חלבי?
You can buy
Yeah, brioche, there's also
brioche and
אבל
they do.
ברioש זה לא
אז זה לא
לחם,
לחם לפי
זה
ההשכלה.
pastries, זה לא לחם.
Okay,
I
Basar
know
B'Cholav
lechem.
is the same thing. First of all, it was like, whether it was mamish lechem or
lechem.
brioche, אני לא זוכר. זה אני לא יודע.
בארץ ישראל, אנחנו מדברים על ארץ ישראל, אין דבר כזה לחם חלבי.
So in France,
לחם,
and
it's
What they do in
must be
France.
זה פרווה.
you have those types of little breads that are a little bit elongated.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're called
Okay.
soft
Brioche?
They're
Brioche?
not really brioche,
Yeah.
but they are milky. Also in Belgium you have that,
Oh.
and they look.
Maybe a
I
different
understand
shape
they look
or...
like they could be
Okay.
parve, but
Okay.
because they're a little bit elongated and they look a certain way, they're milky.
Okay.
I mean, when you're from France
Like
or
cold.
Belgium and maybe also in Switzerland, I don't know if they have
They
it.
definitely
And you
had
would
these.
know
They
that.
were rolls, proper rolls. It was rolls. Whether they were hamotzin or I don't remember. So it was a long time ago. We're talking about 35 plus years ago.
So
Ouch,
you
I'm
could have
old.
sold those sandwiches but not eaten them. So.
Because there was no Issa Banach, it's Drabanon. Yeah.
There's-
Yeah. Look, it wasn't an Issa Deraisa, Baruch Hashem, everything was cold, but still. Anyway. Let's do a few minutes. Let's start the Chazon Ish. Now, this Chazon Ish is. There's a number of parts. It's a very famous Chazon Ish, and you should know there have been a lot written about the context of this Chazon Ish. Okay? And we're not going to focus on the whole. We're not going to even focus on the Chazon Ish's view about cheese because. Do you don't have the Chazon Ish there?
I do. This one's in my base.
It's a very famous person.
So the
Yeah,
page
friend.
before we'll do.
Yeah, here. Nun Vav.
Yeah. So we're going to learn it. We're going to learn Sifkot and Dalad. We're not going to learn the whole thing. There is a lot to be said. The Chazon Ish on cheese was also very fascinating. Avkat Chalav, famous Chazon Ish about Avkat Chalav, and a lot of talk in the later sort of Achroinim about what, because the Chazon Ish was makel on Avkat Chalav. Was it only for Cholim? Was it only for weak people in the early 1940s? We're not going to deal with that, but we are going to focus because we are moving towards discussing Chol of companies, right? This is our sub-sugya that we're doing at the moment, and we cannot do that without learning the Chazon Ish. So we're going to go straight to V'omnam. Do you see it? Mm-hmm. Left-hand column, halfway down, Nun Vav Amud Aleph, V'omnam. No, you're still looking at the Chasam Sofer, you're not going to see it. There we go. V'omnam. Okay, Tov. Alles good? Right. V'omnam, this is an incredible Chazon Ish. V'omnam. B'sheyesh pikuach ha'memshala al ha'cholov. Shelo ya'arvu cholov tomei. V'heim tzvuyim la'oinesh al haziyuf. So if there is governmental supervision,
Like here.
let's reserve judgment. Let's learn the Chazon Ish. No, because we need to be very. What about different countries and then Asian countries? We'll get to all of that.
Okay, say Germany.
Kashelomdim Chazon Ish tzrichim lilmod Chazon Ish. Bon nireh. Let's take his words in context. Number one, if there is pikuach memshala, that they shouldn't put any other chol of tomei in. Vehem tzvuyim la'oinesh al haziyuf, and there would be some sort of oinesh if they there was fraud. Yesh mokoim loymar dehava kishfachos hachoil voice the mirtasais. There is a svara to say the hegioni. It is a savir. It is logish. It's plausible in English to say that it should be the same as our shvachos who milk the cows, and they are mirtasais. If they do something wrong, they'll be caught out. Mirtas, we saw mirtas, yeah? They're worried. Ukeyoshev b'tzad ha'eder. Remember Tosfos, yeah? Ukeyoshev, it's like somebody who's sitting at the side of the flock.
That means they have it, but it's all
Rega, no, you're making assumptions. Let's learn. Ukeyoshev b'tzad ha'eder. Ukeshehu oimed hu royeh. It's like the Yoshev b'tzad ha'eder, which is okay.
Yeah.
Okay? That means you're not actually physically, remember Tosfos, you're not actually physically seeing, but you're in a position where at any moment in time, you can get up and watch and see. And they know that, and therefore there is a mirtas. The Pri Chodosh says that if treif milk is expensive, yesh lahatir, k'may b'morayas, given the hitiru chachamim cholav bizman, shehu mavuro shahari lechadlish nehitiru lasos gevino. V'af l'mayda kaimelon leser hayni mishum cholav debeinei atfi. Aval im hoyo efsher lehavtiach mecholav tomei, loy hoyu oisrim. Says the Chazon Ish, if Chazal would be sure that there was no concern of cholav tomei, they would not have forbidden the cheese. They also allowed it if there is no horse or camel be'edroi in this flock. Ay, v'hoda osru be'ena deri tomei v'en yeshu b'tzad ha'ezer hainu d'choshev k'cholav amufkad b'yad nochri u'kamei shekasavti le'el v'chashinon dikach ha'cholav min ha'akum. But if there's nothing osur, then it would be okay. So this is the first paragraph. If there is no real concern, or you have something in place where the fellow that's doing the milking is not going to do it because you're going to watch and he's going to get caught, you're okay. Next paragraph. The Chasam Sofer we have just learnt. Lefarish divrei Rashi de gozru el agvina, that they made a gzeira on gvina, even though they're sure that there was no cholav tomei, because cholav tahor is like a chaticha de isura, like a dover shebeminyan. Yes, they forbade cholav according to the Chasam Sofer in the first stage of the gzeira altogether. But what happens? What did the Chasam Sofer say? Remember his whole shtickle Torah. But when it changes form, then it becomes mutter. Heim dvarim tmuim ma'oid. Says the Chazon Ish, they are dvarim tmuhim ma'oid. To put it mildly, he does not agree with the Chasam Sofer. Ubarashi mavur behedya. He says if you look in Rashi clearly, you'll see the hachashash. What did the Chasam Sofer say? The reason why Gvina remained asur was because there was still milk left in the cracks, and the Chasam Sofer said, what? Because milk itself is asur. Says the Chazon Ish, that's not pshat in Rashi. Rashi says clearly, Rashi says mafurish, says the Chazon Ish. So we have a big royal battle going on now. Amachlikas Chazon Ish and Chasam Sofer, how to learn Rashi. Zog the Chazon Ish, that Rashi says, the pshat is, Rashi says mafurish. It's because we're worried of cholav tomei. But if I know it's not cholav tomei, then everything would be mutter. Miss out the brackets. Avol mishum cholav tahor v'adayin ligzor. Da'af cholav atzmai, says the Chazon Ish, bottom line. Even cholav itself. Kashem mizbarer she'ein irov cholav tamei. Then it's mutter. If you know there's no cholav tamei, it's mutter. And then he goes on and he says, the Chasam Sofer says in the name of Rashi, to forbid cholav, even though you know it doesn't have cholav tamei in it, tomua. That's only if there is be'ir cholav tomei v'hari hufkad biad akum. He rejects the Chasam Sofer totally, and he goes along with the Pri Chodosh. And therefore, the daya of the Chazon Ish is, it would appear to be that if you have pikuach memshalti and there is tzfuim la'onish, yesh, he says, interesting, he says, yesh mokim loymar, it should be mutter. And he clearly rejects the Chasam Sofer. So we have a right royal battle on our hands, and tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we will give it some more context with a conversation that the Baal Shevet Halevi had with the Chazon Ish, and one also that Reb Moshe Soloveitchik, Chayil Bracha from Zurich, had with the Chazon Ish as well, and we will try and work out what the Chazon Ish said and meant.